Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk.
China. I mean, you see them landing rovers on the moon, right?
Yeah.
Their economy is the second biggest on the planet, and you can hop on a bullet train. Just incredible speed.
Seriously impressive stuff, absolutely.
But then you hear them say, hey, hold on, we're still a developing country. It feels weird.
Uh-huh. It's like seeing, I don't know, a tech billionaire complaining about pocket money. It seems paradoxical.
Exactly. What is the deal there?
Well, that's the central question we're diving into for you today. Why does this nation, which projects such power, insist on this developing label?
Right. And what does it actually mean for everyone else?
And what are the real-world implications? Yeah.
It's like showing up to the potluck with, like, this amazing gourmet dish and then saying you just threw together some leftovers. So for this deep dive, we've gathered a really interesting mix of sources.
Now, let's have a good spread.
We've got reports from VOA, the Central News Agency, CNA, the more official takes. Then there are these lively discussions on Reddit, which give you that kind of ground level feel.
Interesting to get those perspectives, too.
And we've also got analysis from Up Media, Asia Fact Check Lab, keeping things straight.
Good.
Money DJ for the financial side, and even a YouTube video transcript. So a real mix of angles.
Absolutely. And our mission here really is to get beyond just the headlines. We need to understand, first off, what developing country even means, or what people think it means.
Yeah. Is there like one definition?
Well, that's the first hurdle.
Yeah.
Then we explore China's reasons, their motivations for sticking to this label despite, all the obvious progress.
And the contradictions, right? That tension.
Exactly. Understanding that inherent contradiction. So what really makes a country developed in their eyes? What are they looking for?
Well, the big things are usually a high-income economy. We're talking a per capita GDP, typically over $20,000 as of last year anyway.
20,000, okay.
And also a high Human Development Index, the HDI, usually somewhere around 0.9 or even higher.
The HDI. And that score, it tells us about quality of life stuff, right? Like health and education.
That's it. Health, education, living standards, basically how well people are doing overall. A score that high, yeah, it generally means things are looking pretty good in those areas.
So which countries usually pop up on these developed lists?
Yeah.
Regulars?
Yeah, you'll definitely see the usual suspects. The United States, Japan, Germany, the UK, France, Canada, Australia, Switzerland, and Sweden are almost always there too.
Right. Now, this leads to something interesting, especially when you look closely at these lists. Where does Taiwan stand?
Yes. Taiwan is actually recognized as a developed economy. Its per capita GDP in 2023 was roughly $36,600, so well above that $20,000 mark we mentioned.
Significantly above it.
Yeah, and its HDI, the 2022 number, was really strong too, 0.926. Even the World Trade Organization, the WTO, classifies Taiwan as developed.
Okay, got it. Developed status for Taiwan based on those metrics. So let's flip it then. What are the kind of key signs of a developing country according to these lists?
Developing countries, well, they tend to have a lower per capita GDP. Generally, it's in the range of maybe $1,000 up to about $15,000 based on recent figures.
Much wider range there.
It is. And their economies are often still going through major structural changes. It lines up pretty well with how the World Bank groups its low and middle income economies and the WTO's developing country label.
And who tends to fall into that category? Any major examples?
Oh, absolutely. You see huge economies on this list, like China, India, Brazil, Mexico, plus others like Indonesia, Thailand, South Africa, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia. Quite a few big players.
Okay, so that's the really interesting part for many people listening, I bet. Taiwan on the developed list, China on the developing one. Can you quickly recap why, based purely on this data?
Sure. It really just comes down to those key metrics we talked about, per capita GDP and the HDI score.
Right.
Taiwan's income per person is notably higher, and its Human Development Index clears that high threshold needed for developed status, according to these specific international criteria.
And China.
So where does China fit in all this, officially?
Well, China's leadership, Xi Jinping included, has been very explicit. He said at a BRICS summit, China has been and will always remain a member of the developing countries.
Always remain. That's quite a statement, especially coming from the leader of the world's second largest economy.
It really is. And that's where the contradiction just steers you in the face, doesn't it?
Yeah, because you can't ignore their achievements. Manufacturing powerhouse.
Global trade dominance.
Huge investments in tech. That amazing high-speed rail.
And cities. Beijing, Shanghai.
Yeah.
They look incredibly developed. Philippe Benoit calls it a hybrid superpower.
Hybrid superpower. I like that. It captures that feeling, that duality.
It does. But it still feels jarring to some when you compare it to countries facing really deep systemic poverty.
Totally. It feels like a different category.
And that's an argument you hear.
Yeah.
Robert Ross, for example, points out that lifting so many millions out of extreme poverty, the sheer economic scale, it just doesn't seem to fit the traditional developing mold anymore.
Right.
He even mentions that apparently some Chinese citizens find the label a bit contradictory themselves.
Oh, interesting. So why? Why insist? What's the strategy behind holding on to that label?
Well, there seem to be several pretty significant strategic advantages.
Okay, like what? Money.
Money is definitely part of it. A major one is international trade. Being classified as developing often means getting preferential tariff treatment from developed countries.
Ah, like discounts on import taxes.
Exactly. It makes their exports cheaper or competitive globally. That's a huge boost.
Okay, that's a big one. Like a global coupon code.
What else? It can also provide justification for subsidies. China uses the status to defend giving financial support to domestic industries, fishing, tech, even massive state-owned companies that compete globally.
So they can argue, hey, we're developing, we need to support our industries, even if those industries are giants.
That seems to be part of the rationale, yes. It gives them cover for policies that might face more scrutiny if they were officially developed.
Okay. More advantages.
There's also potential access to lower interest loans from institutions like the World Bank.
Cheaper borrowing.
And possibly eligibility for certain types of financial aid, though that might be less significant now given their economic size.
Right. Still, cheap loans are always nice.
And one more big area, international agreements. It's widely thought that maintaining developing status might mean fewer binding obligations.
Like with climate change targets.
That's a prime example. Potentially less stringent requirements on emissions reductions or environmental regulations compared to developed nations.
Okay, wow. So better trade terms, justification for subsidies, cheaper loans, maybe fewer climate rules. This seems like a pretty sweet deal, actually.
From a purely self-interested perspective, you can see the appeal.
But surely other countries aren't just okay with this. There must be pushback.
Oh, absolutely. There's significant pushback. The European Union, for instance, has been quite vocal at the WTO.
What are they saying?
They've basically argued that China's continued claim to developing status isn't fair. They say it prevents truly developing countries, the least developed ones, from getting the full benefit of the special treatment that was designed for them.
That makes sense if China's taking up space in that category.
It potentially dilutes the benefits for others who need it more, like using the handicap spot when you don't strictly need it.
Good analogy. What else are the Europeans saying?
The EU also points to China's extremely high national savings rate, around 45%.
45%? Wow.
Yeah, they say that's unusually high for a country at China's supposed development level, and it creates imbalances in the global trading system.
How does a high savings rate do that?
Well, if people and the state save a huge chunk of income, it can mean less domestic consumption, less buying stuff internally,
Okay.
which can lead to an oversupply of goods within China. So there's more pressure to export those goods, potentially flooding other markets and disrupting trade balances.
Ah, I see. It pushes exports.
Exactly. The EU also accuses China more broadly of distorting markets with its industrial policies. Massive government support for manufacturing, leading to overcapacity.
Right, like in steel or solar panels, we hear about that.
And they raise concerns about policies aimed at replacing imports with domestic goods, and whether foreign companies really get a level playing field inside China.
So the EU is basically saying you act like a global economic superpower when it benefits you, but then claim developing status to get special treatment.
That's a fair summary of their position, yes. And it's not just the EU.
The U.S. too.
The U.S. has also taken a pretty firm stance. There's been actual legislation proposed aimed at stripping China of its developing nation status in international organizations.
Really? Legislation?
Yes, arguing that the current status gives China unfair advantages. So it's definitely a point of contention geopolitically.
No kidding. So this isn't just some academic debate. It's got real diplomatic teeth.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting to see what pops up in less formal discussions, too, like on Reddit.
Oh, yeah. What are people saying there?
Well, many users acknowledge the incredible development in the big coastal cities, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Beijing.
The shiny parts we often see.
Exactly. But they quickly pivot to emphasize the huge disparities. They talk about rural areas, inland regions.
Where things are very different.
Very different. Much poorer infrastructure, lower incomes, different living standards. One person mentioned seeing really basic sanitation in rural Liaoning just last year.
Yeah.
It highlights that unevenness.
Wow. Yeah, that paints a different picture than the Shanghai skyline.
It really does. It shows that China isn't monolithic. It's vast and complex with huge internal differences.
Makes sense.
The Reddit threads also bring up that WTO's self-declaration thing again.
Right, that you can just claim it.
And the fact that other countries can challenge it. It's not like it's set in stone forever if other members object strongly enough.
So there's a process, even if it's tricky.
There is. And another point that comes up often is the population size impact on per capita GDP.
We touched on that. Big economy, but huge population.
Right. So even with a massive overall economy and a powerful military, if you divide the economic output by 1.4 billion people, the number per person is lower than in many developed countries.
And they can point to that number.
They can, and they do, as justification. Yeah. It's a statistical argument that carries weight in some definitions.
The big pie, many slices point again.
Exactly. And then there's the broader strategic angle.
Geopolitics.
Yeah. Some analysts suggest that by identifying as a developing country, China can position itself politically with the global south, the majority of the world's nations.
Ah, like saying, we're one of you, building alliances.
Precisely. Acting as a leader or partner within that large bloc, while maybe also getting a bit more flexibility. Perhaps being seen as less obligated to follow all the rules expected of a fully developed power. Some might call it acting as a free rider to an extent.
Being part of the club, but maybe not paying all the dues. That's some clever diplomacy if it works.
It's certainly a strategic calculation, and that Up Media report you mentioned really drills down on those specific economic benefits.
Right. What did it highlight?
Low interest loans from the World Bank, lower tariff rates than developed nations face, potentially significant amounts of development aid historically, and those more lenient carbon emission policies we talked about.
Concrete financial advantages.
Very concrete.
Yeah.
It underlines that this isn't just about image or semantics. There are tangible economic wins linked to holding on to this status.
Yeah, you can see why they'd be reluctant to give that up.
Definitely. And those Reddit discussions,
yeah,
they often come back to precisely these points, the trade benefits, the tariff breaks as the core motivation.
Makes sense. Follow the money, right?
Often a good strategy. There's even some speculation on Reddit, just user theories.
Yeah.
That China might be intentionally managing some economic figures, maybe keeping per capita GDP just below certain thresholds, specifically to retain these benefits.
Whoa. That's next level strategic thinking. Purposefully underperforming slightly to stay in the lower category.
It's a provocative thought, probably impossible to prove, but it shows how people are trying to understand the persistence of this status.
It really does.
And remember that YouTube video transcript. It brought up China's dual circulation strategy.
Right, boosting both internal and external economic engines.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
But the speaker in the video was critical. They suggested it's actually more like singular circulation, heavily reliant on exports. Meaning that China might be, perhaps intentionally, suppressing domestic consumption to some degree, making them more dependent on external demand like from the U.S. to keep their economy humming.
So if their internal engine isn't fully firing, the benefits of being developing, especially those trade benefits, become even more crucial.
That was the implication in that particular analysis, yes. It adds another layer to why they might cling to the label.
Interesting take.
And that speaker used a really vivid analogy, too.
Oh, yeah.
They compared China's position to a teenager, sometimes wanting all the privileges and respect of being an adult.
Sure, wanting the car keys, the late curfew.
Exactly. But then, when it's convenient, wanting to fall back on the benefits of being a child, like having parents pay the bills or getting away with stuff.
The classic, I'm old enough to stay out late, but too young to pay for my own phone plan argument. I know that teenager.
We all do. And they applied that directly to China's economic status, wanting the global influence of a developed nation, but the economic perks of a developing one.
That really crystallizes the contradiction, doesn't it?
I thought it did, yeah.
Okay, so let's try and wrap our heads around this. We've got a nation with this undeniably massive economy, huge global impact.
Second largest in the world, major technological force.
But at the same time, it still has characteristics you associate with developing countries, especially that lower income per person and the really stark differences between the rich cities and the poorer countryside.
That sums up the core tension pretty well. And the reasons for sticking with the developing label seem to be this mix.
Yeah.
Real economic advantages, trade, loans, subsidies, a definite geopolitical strategy aligning with the global south, maybe gaining flexibility, and possibly genuine internal development challenges that aren't always visible from afar.
So it's complicated. It's not just one thing.
Definitely not. And it shows that this whole debate isn't just when economists in ivory towers. It has real consequences for global trade rules, for who's expected to do what about climate change, for the whole balance of power.
Absolutely. Which kind of leaves you wondering.
That's that.
Well, given everything we've discussed about China, this kind of hybrid situation, does the old way of dividing countries into just two boxes developing even work anymore?
That's a fantastic question. Is it too simplistic for today's world?
Maybe we need, I don't know, new categories or different ways to measure development that capture this complexity better.
It's definitely something to think about. The traditional labels might be struggling to keep up with reality, especially with a case like China's.
Lots to chew on there. Thanks for breaking all that down.
My pleasure. It's a truly fascinating puzzle with huge implications.
It really is. And for you listening, we hope this deep dive gave you some food for thought on this complex issue. Definitely check out the sources if you want to dig deeper.
And maybe think about what developed even means to you in the 21st century. The lines seem blurrier than ever.
For sure. And here's a final thought to leave you with. If we did start classifying nations differently, how might a reclassification of a giant like China change the future of global cooperation and competition?
A big question indeed.